Before defining story, you should know that why stories are important, why people tell stories, or why people write stories. So let me tell you why stories are important. The number first, stories are important because stories teach us lesson. समझते हो कि नहीं? Stories have morals or not? So from that moral we get the lesson. We get the lesson that what is good or what is bad. So in this way stories are important. So this is the first way. What about the second thing? The second way that why stories are important is stories share experiences, that what other people think or feel. So this is the second way why stories are important. And what about the third one? The third point is why stories are important. Stories make learning fun. So that's why today we are going to cover this topic, because they make learning what? Fun. So this is the third way that why stories are important. Another way, the fourth point, stories inspire creativity. Stories encourage imagination or ideas. So in this way stories are important. This is the fourth way that stories are important. Got it? What about the fifth one? Okay, what about the fifth, the most important? I myself agree to this point. I myself agree to the fifth point that I'm going to tell you. That is what? Stories connect people. What a great point. That's why I love writing stories, or I love to tell stories. Stories connect people. Story help us relate to each other. So what a great point is this. So I agree to this point and you should as well. Got it? So these are the ways that why stories are important to tell, why stories are important to write. Now let me define a story. What a story is. Let me define it. Okay, story. So today we are going to cover what? Today we are going to cover this story. Story. What is story? Story is a description. Is a description of what? Is a description of events. Is a description of events that happens to. Which events? That happens to. Events that happens to people. That happens to people. That happens to animals, or that happens to objects. That happens to objects in such a way, it's not. This is what story is. Okay, this is what story is. In such a way we define it. Got it? So what a story is? Story is basically a description of events that happens to people, animals or objects. So this is the way how we define story. Now while writing a story, the writer should consider what? What are the parts of a story that writer should consider to write a comprehensive story? So let me tell you the important parts of writing a story. Got it? So what are the parts of a story? Note down it. The important parts that writers should consider to write a story, they are what? What about the first one? The most important one, that is the introduction. The introduction should be in such a way that grabs the attention of a reader. So this is most considerable part of a story. Got it? What this introduction include? This introduction includes number first, that is character. That is characters. That is characters. Now what is meant by character? That who is in the story? Who is in the story? That character may be people, character may be animals or objects. So who is in the story? The writer should write about this. Who is in the story? And what about the second thing? Second thing that you should write in introduction part, that is the place. That is the place where the story happens. Where the story happens. This is the second part of introduction. So the writer should write about the place, the location where the story happens. Got it? So this is the way to write a comprehensive introduction. You should mention what? You should mention what? You should mention characters. You should mention characters first, and you should mention the location. The location. Got it? Now come towards the next point. The next point is the conflict. The next part is the conflict. Okay, now what a conflict is, let me define it. The second part, the first part is introduction, the second part is conflict. Conflict. Now what a conflict is? In this part, the writer writes about something that goes wrong. The writer writes about something that goes wrong. So this part is called what? This part is called conflict. Okay, so here the writer writes about, is it visible? The writer writes about something that goes wrong. Now what are the something? Okay, this may be what? This may be a problem. This something may be a problem that the writer writes about in the conflict part. Okay, this may be a challenge. This may be a challenge that character faces. Okay, this may be a problem. This may be a challenge that character faces. So this is what the writer writes in the conflict part. समझ आ रही है? समझते हो के नहीं? Got it? ये वाला अच्छा. What about the third one? The third part is now how will you challenge that phase? How will you face that problem? So what the characters are going to do? The characters are going to take action. The characters are going to take action about that problem, about that challenge. So what is the third part? The third part is the action. The third part is the action. Now the writer is going to write what in this part? The writer is going to write what the characters did to resolve that action, that problem, to face that challenge. Got it? So the writer writes what? The writer is going to write. The writer writes what did the characters do? What did the characters do to resolve that problem? समझते हो कि नहीं? Or to face that challenge. Okay, so this is the third part. The writer writes the action of the characters to solve that problem. Got it? Now come towards the most exciting part. The most exciting part of the story. That is number 4, and this part is known as climax. This part is known as what? Climax. Now in this part, the writer writes that how did the characters try to resolve that problem. Okay, what were the ways that the characters tried to resolve that problem? So that is the climax. This is the most exciting part of a story. So in this part, the writer writes that how the characters tried to resolve that problem. आती है बात समझ सबको? समझते हो? Okay, so this is what about climax. Now the writer is going to come towards the end of the story. The writer will end a story. So the next part, the fifth part is what? The fifth part is your resolution. The ending part, the last section of a story. The last section of a story. Now, in resolution, the writer will mention first. What the writer will mention first, that is how the problems were resolved. How were the problems resolved? Or how was that challenge faced? How was the problem resolved? Or you can write that how that challenge was faced. Okay, this is the first way. The second thing, the writer should write in the resolution part, that is what the writer or what the reader, okay, what the writer, first writer, what the writer get, what the writer learn from that story, or when the readers read that story, what they learn. So that is the moral. The writer should write a moral. The writer should write a moral. So these are the 5 key parts to write a comprehensive story. समझते हो कि नहीं? Now while writing a story, while writing a moral, not a story, while writing a moral, what are the steps to remember? What are the steps? Okay, what steps should the writer consider to write a moral? So steps to write moral, you should know that how to write a moral. So what are the steps? Number first, the writer should write about the lesson that the writer learned from that story. Okay, the writer should think about what? The lesson. So think about the lesson. Think about the lesson. What is the next step? What is the next step to write a moral? The next step, the writer should write that moral in a short single sentence. In a short single sentence. Okay, so it should be of one sentence. And what about the third one? What about the third step that writer should consider while writing moral? That is, that moral should be in simple words to remember it easily. समझते हो कि नहीं? Got it? The moral should be in simple words. In simple words to remember it. Okay, to remember that. So in this way a moral is written. Got it? Okay, so what did I tell you? I tell you before defining a story that why stories are important. I tell you in 5 ways. Okay, in 5 ways why stories are important to write or to tell. Then I defined stories, then I taught you that what are the key parts of a story, writing a comprehensive story. Got it? So till here any question पूछना सवाब है?